Appendix 3, Orange Revolution. The Orange Revolution represented Ukraine's first major attempt to break from post-Soviet authoritarian patterns and orient toward European democratic values. While it ultimately failed to achieve lasting institutional reform, it established an important precedent of civil resistance and demonstrated Ukraine's complex position between Russia and the West, tensions that would later erupt in the 2013 to 2014 Euromaidan protests and subsequent Russian aggression. Background and lead-up events, 1991 to 2004. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left Ukraine with the monumental task of building a new nation-state while simultaneously transitioning from a command economy to a market system. The early years of independence under President Leonid Kravchuk, 1991 to 1994, were characterized by economic freefall, with hyperinflation reaching over 10,000% and industrial output plummeting. These economic challenges created fertile ground for widespread corruption as state assets were hastily privatized, often ending up in the hands of former Soviet officials or well-connected businessmen who would later be known as oligarchs. Leonid Kuchma's presidency, 1994 to 2004, initially brought a degree of economic stabilization but increasingly shifted toward authoritarianism. Kuchma implemented market reforms and achieved some macroeconomic stability by the late 1990s, yet simultaneously consolidated power in the presidency while allowing oligarchic groups to strengthen their hold on the economy. His administration became increasingly associated with corruption, censorship, and intimidation of political opponents. The political system that developed under Kuchma has been characterized by scholars as competitive authoritarianism, maintaining democratic facades while manipulating institutions to ensure continued power. A pivotal moment came in 2000 with the disappearance and murder of investigative journalist Georgy Gongadze, who had been reporting on high-level corruption. The subsequent cassette scandal, in which leaked recordings appeared to implicate Kuchma in ordering violence against Gongadze, severely damaged the president's legitimacy. These events triggered the Ukraine without Kuchma protests in 2000 to 2001, representing the first significant anti-government demonstrations of the independence era and laying important groundwork for future civic activism. As the 2004 presidential election approached, Ukrainian society had become increasingly polarized between those advocating closer integration with the West and proponents of strengthening ties with Russia. This division largely reflected Ukraine's complex regional, linguistic, and cultural landscape, with Western and Central regions generally favoring European integration while Southern and Eastern regions maintained stronger connections to Russia. The 2004 election would bring these tensions to the forefront, ultimately triggering Ukraine's first post-Soviet political crisis. The 2004 presidential election and electoral fraud. The 2004 presidential race primarily featured two contrasting candidates who embodied Ukraine's geopolitical crossroads. Viktor Yushchenko, a former central bank governor and prime minister, 1999 to 2001, represented a pro-Western, reformist platform that emphasized democratic values, reducing corruption, and European integration. Viktor Yanukovych, then prime minister, was positioned as Kuchma's chosen successor and enjoyed strong backing from both the incumbent administration and the Russian government, which provided political consultants and significant financial support for his campaign. The electoral contest took a sinister turn in September 2004 when Yushchenko became severely ill after dining with Ukrainian security officials. He was eventually diagnosed with dioxin poisoning in an Austrian clinic, which left his face disfigured and nearly killed him. Though never conclusively proven in court, the poisoning was widely interpreted as an assassination attempt by forces aligned with the regime, demonstrating the high stakes and dangerous nature of Ukrainian politics. The first round of voting on October 31, 2004, proved inconclusive, with Yushchenko receiving 39.9% of votes and Yanukovych 39.3%, necessitating a runoff. The second round on November 21 produced a suspicious result. Despite exit polls showing a clear Yushchenko victory, official results declared Yanukovych the winner with 49.5% against Yushchenko's 46.6%. Evidence of massive fraud quickly emerged, including multiple voting, ballot stuffing, abuse of absentee ballots, and suspiciously high turnout in Yanukovych's strongholds. International observers from the OSCE documented systematic violations, concluding that the election did not meet a considerable number of OSCE commitments and Council of Europe standards for democratic elections. The Orange Revolution mobilization. The fraudulent election results catalyzed what would become known as the Orange Revolution, named after Yushchenko's campaign color. Starting on November 22, 2004, vast numbers of Ukrainians took to the streets of Kiev, with the largest demonstrations centered on Independence Square, Maidan Nezalezhnosti. Within days, protest camps had been established, massive stages constructed, and a sea of orange flags and ribbons appeared across the capital. At its peak, the movement brought an estimated 500,000 to 1 million protesters to Kiev's center, with simultaneous demonstrations in other cities, particularly in western and central Ukraine. The Orange Revolution distinguished itself through its explicitly nonviolent approach, creative tactics, and remarkable discipline. Protesters maintained continuous presence through harsh winter conditions, organized food distribution and medical services, and established effective communication systems. Ukrainian civil society organizations, many of which had received training and funding from Western democracy promotion programs in preceding years, played crucial roles in mobilizing participants and maintaining the protests' peaceful character. The international dimension of the crisis quickly emerged as a crucial factor. While Russian President Vladimir Putin had openly supported Yanukovych, congratulating him on victory before official results were even announced, Western governments refused to recognize the fraudulent results. The diplomatic intervention of Polish President Alexander Kwasniewski, Lithuanian President Valdis Adamkus, and EU High Representative Javier Solana proved particularly important in facilitating negotiations between the government and opposition. These international mediators helped establish a framework for resolving the crisis through legal and political mechanisms rather than force. Resolution and Yushchenko's presidency. Ukraine's Supreme Court emerged as a crucial independent arbiter in the crisis. On December 3, 2004, it ruled that the extensive irregularities made it impossible to determine the election's true result and ordered an unprecedented third round of voting. This judicial decision, coupled with intense domestic and international pressure, forced the Kuchma administration to accept a compromise. The Ukrainian parliament also played a constructive role, passing electoral reforms to prevent future fraud and constitutional amendments that would reduce presidential powers after the election. The repeat runoff election on December 26, 2004, conducted under intense international scrutiny with over 12,000 foreign observers, delivered a clear victory for Yushchenko with 52% of the vote to Yanukovych's 44.2%. Despite his defeat, Yanukovych initially challenged the results but eventually conceded. Viktor Yushchenko was inaugurated as Ukraine's third president on January 23, 2005, marking the successful conclusion of the Orange Revolution as a rare example of a people-powered movement overturning electoral fraud in the post-Soviet space. Yushchenko's presidency, however, failed to deliver on many of the Orange Revolution's promises. His administration was quickly beset by internal conflicts, particularly with Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, who was dismissed after just 9 months in office. The constitutional reforms enacted during the crisis created an awkward semi-parliamentary system that generated continuous executive-legislative conflicts. Economic progress was uneven, and many promised anti-corruption measures stalled. The global financial crisis of 2008 further derailed reform efforts, causing Ukraine's economy to contract by 15% in 2009. Ukraine-Russia relations after the Orange Revolution. The Orange Revolution fundamentally altered Ukraine's relationship with Russia, which viewed the events as both a geopolitical defeat and a threatening precedent. President Putin and other Russian officials repeatedly characterized the revolution as a Western-orchestrated coup that employed NGOs and civil society groups as fronts for advancing American interests in the region. This interpretation profoundly shaped Russia's subsequent policies toward both Ukraine and its own domestic civil society. Almost immediately following Yushchenko's inauguration, Russia began using economic leverage to pressure Ukraine, most notably through energy politics. The Russian state gas company Gazprom demanded a more than fourfold increase in the price of natural gas in late 2005, and when Ukraine refused, Russia cut supplies in January 2006 in the middle of winter. Though gas flows were restored after Ukraine accepted higher prices, this gas war exposed Ukraine's energy vulnerability and Russia's willingness to use resources as geopolitical weapons. A second, more severe gas crisis followed in January 2009. President Yushchenko pursued an explicitly pro-Western foreign policy, seeking NATO membership and enhanced EU integration. These moves further antagonized Russia, which viewed potential NATO expansion to Ukraine as crossing a fundamental security red line. At the 2008 NATO Bucharest summit, Putin reportedly told US President George W. Bush that Ukraine is not even a state, and threatened that Ukraine's NATO membership could result in the country's dismemberment, an ominous foreshadowing of events that would unfold years later. By 2010, public disillusionment with the Orange government's infighting and unfulfilled promises created an opening for Viktor Yanukovych's political comeback. His victory in the 2010 presidential election, deemed generally free and fair by international observers, brought a reversal in Ukraine's geopolitical orientation. Yanukovych quickly signed the Kharkiv agreements extending Russia's lease on naval facilities in Crimea until 2042 in exchange for gas discounts, abandoned NATO membership aspirations, and began rebuilding ties with Moscow. However, the Orange Revolution had awakened Ukrainian civil society and established a precedent of popular resistance that would prove crucial during later crises.